Could you tell me what your full name is?
It's Margaret Joan McCuaig. I was born in Summerland in 1948, apparently in a thunder and lightning storm. So that's a interesting way to come into the world. And then next came Bill. He was born 1950, and he was followed by Nancy. She was born 1952. And then Mary is our youngest, and she was born 1954. So we're all 2 years apart. So Dad was born and raised in Montreal and went to McDonald College, which was an agricultural school close to Montreal. And his internship was I don't know how long it was, whether it was a year or it was a summer, with the Summerland Research Station. He came out and fell in love with the Okanagan. He then, and I'm not clear on details in terms of dates, but then he served in the war. And after the war was finished, he then came out to Summerland because he was attracted to it. And so he came out, I believe, in about 46 or 47 and established himself in Summerland. And then he met our mother, Marion McCuaig, who was born in Vernon and raised up there. And so they met and married in 1947 and came together to Summerland.
And your dad came here to work on agriculture, correct?
That's right. Yes, because he was attracted to the farming and to the orchards, and his background was in orcharding and in irrigation. So I'd like to just pause here to say that if people are interested in his military, the Royal Canadian Air Force history of Dad, there is an excellent display in the museum, in the Summerland Museum, on that. I was really impressed with what you folks have done with the material that we donated to the museum on his flying and his Royal Canadian Air Force history. It's very impressive. Dad kept everything. I mean, he kept his rations, and he kept his uniform, and he kept all his flight logs and so on. So there's quite a dense history of his time in the Air Force. And he loved it. Apart from the fact that it was war, he said it was an amazing time of camaraderie and the sense of working together to defend the country. So it was a very meaningful time for Dad.
What about your mother?
Mom trained at the Vancouver General Hospital as a nurse and got her RN. And then she moved, she was from from Vernon, and she moved to Kamloops to work in the hospital there. And then when she and Dad married, she came and worked in the Summerland General Hospital, initially as a staff nurse, I guess you would call it, in the hospital. When the hospital closed, the one on the Summerland Hospital Hill, it was called at the time, she then moved with the hospital to what is now the Dr. Andrew Pavilion, and she worked in the operating room. She specialized in the operating room, and she worked with Dr. Wilf Evans, who's a well-known physician from Summerland. They worked together, and she specialized in that. She worked our whole life, our whole family life. She'd work nights, or she'd work, certain shifts when we were at school. It was quite amazing that she worked not full-time, but certainly part-time. And she went on to work her entire life until, I don't know what age. She worked then in the community after she finished working in the hospital. When the hospital closed, she worked in the community as a community nurse. She taught many of the women in Summerland to drive a car. She volunteered with Brownies. She volunteered at church camps. I don't remember her joining a volunteer group, but certainly she was very involved in the community.
And going back to your dad, I believe he became a high school teacher after he did some agriculture for a time in Summerland. Is that correct?
That is correct. He worked for the VLA, the Veterans Land Act. And he initially, when he and Mom were first married, he worked throughout the Okanagan, helping veterans to get land and to turn that land into agricultural land through irrigation and through proper management. So he worked there until I think it was about 57 when what I understand from my memory is that he and mom talked about how much he was traveling and how hard that
Mm,
was on the family because he'd
yeah.
be away. And so he went to UBC for a year in 57 when we were all pretty young, and he got his degree in education. So then he came back to the community, and he was a high school teacher. He taught chemistry. He actually was part of the crew that did the sets for the musicals and the productions that went on at the school. Primarily, he taught math and chemistry. And then he retired from that in, I believe it was 70-71, the school year of 70-71. And he actually went back into agriculture, and he worked with Peter Yeomans
Mm,
installing irrigation in the community, and then ultimately worked for Manpower, which was
mm,
called Manpower back in the day. I'm not sure what it's called now, finding jobs for people. And then at the very end of his career, he worked for the name escapes me, but it's maybe farm labor office where you call them itinerant workers were coming through, and farmers needed, orchardists needed those people to work in their orchard. So dad would coordinate the needs of the orchardists with the young people who were traveling from Mexico or from Quebec or from
yeah.
wherever to come and pick the fruit. So dad did that in his later years. And he then, I just had forgotten that he volunteered there was a Red Cross loan cupboard. And dad worked there, I think, cleaning the equipment and then loaning it out to people who needed it. Anyway, that was, I think, his last volunteer.
And then he lived out the rest of his retirement life here, correct?
Yes, both mom and dad lived and died in Summerland.
I know your sister Nancy had cerebral palsy, and I know your parents were quite caring with her. Do you want to tell me kind of what your family experience was like with your sister's cerebral palsy?
Probably the two most influential things in our family's life were living in Summerland and growing up in Summerland and the incredible opportunities that were there, and having a sister with a family member who was profoundly disabled. So Nance was born in 52, and there were no resources in Summerland or even in the Okanagan. So mom and dad went down to Vancouver to GS Strong, the rehab center there, where they met with a team of doctors. And the physician's recommendation was that they put Nancy into Woodlands, which was a long-term care facility for people with myriad of disabilities, and that she would live her life there because they said she won't live beyond 2. So mom and dad said, over our dead body, no child of ours is going to live in an institution. And so she came home. I cannot say enough about my parents' determination to have Nancy integrated into our family and into the community, and also the support we got from the community. So initially, there were no resources in the Okanagan, and mom and dad with other parents, they established what later became the Okanagan Neurological Association. It started off as I believe, the Cerebral Palsy Association in Kelowna, and they became the Okanagan Neurological Association. And you can look up online to see the amazing progression of that, which is a viable resource today for people with a myriad of disabilities. So mom and dad's attitude was not, will Nancy do something, but how will she do that? So how will she participate in swimming and working on the farm and going to school? And so initially they were told, my parents were told, that there's no point in educating Nancy because she probably won't live past 7. So there were no education doors open for her in that day. One of the resources that was developed, and I don't think it was developed for Nancy, but Brenda Liebert got her degree or got some sort of certificate, and she started what was called the Apple Blossom School. It was run by Brenda Liebert and Dorothy Fisher. And it ran only for 2 or 3 years in the Anglican church. And it was if you will, a kindergarten for people who did not fit into the regular school system. So there were quite a variety of children there, and they played games and they did singing and they did all sorts of things that kids do when they're in kindergarten. So that ran for 2 years. And my understanding is that it closed when these children were allowed to go to school. I believe it closed in 1957. Nancy still had to prove herself that she was eligible to go into school because my parents were determined that she would get an education. There were many obstacles set out by the principal and by whoever sets the standards in the school, including there were no ramps, like it was all stairs up to the school. So Nancy had to go and live at what was called the Princess Margaret Village in Vancouver, which was a facility for children with disabilities. And she had to prove by going there, living there, and going to school at GF Strong, that she was intelligent. And she was able to prove that. And then she was admitted to the school. And this wonderful teacher, Mrs. Emery, led this class, again, of kids with very disparate, in very disparate situations. And Nancy indeed received an education of sorts. Mm-hmm. And so this is a young girl who was, she couldn't walk, she couldn't talk, she couldn't write, she couldn't, she could barely type. And who then, went on to live to be, she died at 64. Oh. So, yeah. And she went through the elementary school under the condition that mom would bring her to school and haul her up the stairs, come in at recess and look after her, feed her at lunchtime, and come and get her in the afternoon at the end of school. And I'm not sure how it started, but there was a senior girls service club in the high school that we were then allowed to go out for a recess or for a lunchtime and help Nancy. So that's just one example of how the school and the community supported Nancy in this effort. And it was through the efforts of Bob and June Barkwell, good friends of mom and dad. June was a nurse, Bob was an orchardist, and Bob was on the school board. And it was through his efforts and lobbying of mom and dad's part that got Nancy to school. So a lot of support from Summerland. Her first method of communication was, to go like this because she wanted to drink, or like this because she wanted to talk to someone, and then she had to learn to spell. And how many of us can spell well enough to communicate, at that age, never mind at, 20 and 30 and 40. Most of our stories would be around the orchard. We had 22 acres. A lot of that was in orchard. So certainly our formative years were spent growing up in Summerland and working in the orchard in the summer, and all of us participating in some way. Mom loved working in the orchard, so my responsibilities would be in the house, helping Nancy, and we'd set Nancy up at this little ironing board, and she'd have to, iron the hankies and do what she could. So I think the most remarkable thing about our family and my parents was it's not whether Nancy or whether the family will do something. It was, how can we do it? So for, I don't know whether it was $5 or $25, we joined the ski hill, and Dad helped establish the ski hill along with Don Ager and Mr. Hermanson and Bob Barkwell and Walter Powell. And I don't remember when that started, but we all would go skiing. And we'd hold Nancy under her arms like this, and she'd have skis on, and we'd grab the bar, or at least the rope tow, and up we'd go, and then you'd fall off at the top, and then you put yourself together, and then hold on to Nance as we're coming down, and so you're organizing four skis as you come down the hill, and we all did that. We all participated in that, and Dad would sometimes have Nance on his back to ski. We went swimming every summer. We worked in the orchard till about 2:00 when the fruit went to the packing house. And then Mom would pack us all into the car and usually pick up other people along the way. And we'd all go swimming. And Nancy would go too. And we would throw Nance. So one of us would stand here and another person would stand there, maybe, 4 feet away. And we'd throw Nance into the water, and she'd go like this with her head. And then when she'd run out of air, she'd turn her head like this. And on one occasion, reported our family to, to the police or whoever. They thought we were abusing her.
Oh.
So, my parents were amazing in what they ventured with the efficacy of agency. Billy loved the orchard. He grew up hiking in the canyon, in the Trout Creek Canyon. They'd go off my parents were very trusting. We had a really solid family, and Billy would say, well, he's going for an overnight hike with Bruce Lane or Johnny Liebert, and off they'd go, and they'd go down into the Trout Creek Canyon and up the other side and be gone, overnight and be back in the morning. So we were given a lot of freedom in that regard. My sister Mary, our youngest, she remembers going to, when she was about 2 or 3, so we lived obviously on our orchard, and she'd say, Mom, I'm going over to see Humphrey. And Humphrey was Humphrey Fisk, who lived maybe 1/4 kilometer. It would be about 15-minute walk. But for Mary, so she'd go off, see Humphrey, spend her time with him, going around feeding the chickens and following him around the yard. And then lunchtime, she'd come back home. So we explored the land, and we enjoyed being on the land, and with a lot of freedom in that.
The KVR, or the Kettle Valley Railway, did you ever have much experience with the train, either through cargo deliveries or passenger deliveries?
When we were growing up, every year at Christmas, we would get a parcel from my dad's mom and dad and his aunt in Montreal, and they would send it via the railway. So it was a very exciting time at Christmas. We would get the note that the parcel had arrived, and we'd drive to the station, which is no longer there. So we would drive to the station and go in, and the station master would, go into the back, find the parcel, and then we would bring it home. So that was our main experience with that. The train did, in fact, run right by our property on the south side of our property. So we would often run down and wave to the engineer or the caboose people, and But we weren't, and we walked across the trestle. I don't think Mary, and certainly not Nancy, but Billy would walk across the trestle to the experimental station, and I would. And in fact, people who worked there and lived by us, who worked would walk across the trestle regularly. And we were allowed to do that. Like our parents were very trusting of us to, not in a foolhardy way, but in a try it out.
How big was Summerland while you were growing up here?
5,000.
And was it quite condensed, or was it kind of spread out?
I would say it was more spread out than it is now. Well, we didn't have the density in terms of the townhouses and the condominiums that you have that are there now. So we were 3 miles from town, and that was just and our neighbors were down the tracks or across the bridge, or not the bridge. We had a bridge, but it was taken down through the orchards. So many more I think one of the bigger changes that I see now is the density. And so one of the biggest changes is from the orchards to the vineyards. We had many more orchards. Almost everybody we knew had an orchard or a business, and not vineyards. Vineyards were just coming into I don't know, fashion, if you will, in probably the late 60s and 70s. I understand, having lived as a daughter of an orchardist, how difficult it is to be an orchardist. You are dependent on weather, and you are dependent on the appetite people have for fruit. So there were, if you had a bumper year of crop, a bumper year of cherries, the prices would go down. If you had a lot of rain and hail, if the cherries were split, the price would go up, but you wouldn't have much of a crop. So it's a hard life being an orchardist. There's the land, and then the sprinklers, and the caring for them, and the pruning. There's a lot of work for what you may or may not get out of it. So I understand the change to vineyards. Vineyards don't require ladders. They don't require nearly as much care. So I understand that.
How long were you in Summerland for until you moved away?
I graduated in 65, and I left the following September. I went away to school I actually went to a Baptist Leadership Training School for a year in Calgary. And from there, I went to UBC to pursue education as an occupational therapist and physical therapist, and graduated from there in 1970. So I left home when I was 16 or 17. I left home, and I never lived at home again. I certainly visited. We all visited a lot. We all came home a lot to see our parents, and for Christmases and so on. One of the riches of growing up in a small town is that people know you. And I guess that can be for good or ill. I was approached by the Rotary Club to become a Rotary Scholar. I never had that idea in my mind. I never thought of applying for it. And it was through the kindness and the thoughtfulness of people such as Ted Atkinson, Gordon Smith, and Morris Welsh. And they, for some reason, they asked me if I would be a Rotary Scholar and would represent the Rotary Club of Summerland. So I came up and I spoke there, and they said, yes, we'd like to support you. And then I went to the larger Rotarian organization. I forget what the number is, but it includes Kamloops down through to Wenatchee. And I was successful there. And I was sponsored by the Rotary Club for a year to get my master's in Los Angeles. And that changed my life. And it was because the people in Summerland said, here's an opportunity. Would you like to take it? Never would have crossed my mind. And it literally changed my life in that I had been working clinically, which I loved. I worked as an occupational therapist in Vancouver for many years. And getting my master's opened the door to teaching at the university, which I did until I retired in whatever it was, 98. Huge opportunity to shift my direction to teaching, which was wonderful, and a wonderful way to end my career in Vancouver. I then went on to Victoria, where I worked clinically, but that's to the credit of the Rotary Club of Summerland. And that's the value or the benefit of living in a small community where people say, hey, let's ask Margaret McCuaig if she, let's ask Ian, first of all, whether he thinks Margaret would like to do this, and then meeting with me and making that offer. It's a huge privilege to be the recipient of a community's generosity. And I think that happens perhaps more in a small community than in a larger setting. I would have had to actively pursue that. I didn't even know it existed. So so that was a huge benefit to me, and also for the rest of us. Mary had wonderful opportunities in singing in a church group and playing the guitar, and I don't know that you would get those opportunities in a larger place. And Nancy was well known and loved, and our family were well supported, because of the respect people had for my mom and dad, who were incredible pioneers. We had opportunities that I think stood us really well to go, to be launched. And we all moved away from home, which is also interesting. There just weren't that many opportunities. If you were, I clearly wasn't interested in orcharding. And, I wanted an opportunity beyond what the town could offer. So moved to the city, as did Billy and Nancy, and also left home. And Mary as well. So
Just going back to Nancy, you said she moved away. What was her life kind of like after she left?
I left home, Billy left home, and then Mary left home. And Mary was younger than Nancy. And Nancy looked around and said, "What's wrong here? Why am I still at home?" And I would say, and there were very few opportunities in what was that, 1970, 71, very few opportunities for folks who were as profoundly disabled as Nancy, living situations. And they were mostly senior facilities and mostly seniors with dementia. So for Nancy to go to something in the Okanagan like that was totally unacceptable to all of us. So she applied for and was accepted at a facility called Pearson. And Pearson it was back in the day, a long-term care facility for people with disabilities, people with head injuries, people with multiple. It was also the place for people with who had polio and were in iron lungs. So a variety of people with disabilities. So Nancy moved there in, I believe it was 1970 or 71. 71, I think. I would say that was the saddest day of our family's life. That after all that had been poured into our family and into Nancy's life, that she would then be in a facility, because everything we had done was to keep her out of a facility. So she lived at Pearson for almost 30 years. And she became involved with the Baptist church that I took her to, and then she eventually started going on her own, and she took some courses at night school, or I can't remember now where, and she got very involved in the facility in doing whatever she could. She made friends in Vancouver, people who would come and visit her, or that she would go out. She would come out to I would take her to church every Sunday. So she got involved in the larger community, and eventually she was able to, through advocacy, mostly on her part and her staff, to get out into an independent living situation. So she I moved in 1999 or 2000, she moved into an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment with 24-hour care provided by women who were hired and stayed with her and looked after her. And that was a miracle, that she then was in her own apartment with abilities to get out to shopping centers, to go to church, to see the community. And that is where she died eventually at the age of 64. So an amazing, for someone who they said she won't live to be 2, to die at 64 is remarkable, with a cadre of friends. And one of the most influential people I know in terms of what when I was teaching at UBC, Nancy came out as a guest speaker to my classes to speak to the students about what it was like to live with a disability and to be part of the community, and what her struggles were, and what her hopes were, and what her goals were. So she was highly influential.
Do you visit Summerland often?
I do. And I did. All of us kept coming home, till mom and dad were gone. And past then, I come up quite regularly. I come up once or twice a year. I love Summerland, and I love my connections there. I come up now for the Meadowlark Festival, which I'm sure people know about. It's a wonderful event held in May. Great festival. I also come up regularly to shop at Susan Lobateki's Sass Boutique, my favorite dress store. I walk in and I say, okay, dress me, and they do. And I love it. So creative, great store, wonderful service, lovely garments. So it's my favorite shopping place. And I love to go to Zia's, the restaurant.
Yeah.
It was Mom and Dad's favorite. We went there for years with Mom and Dad. They were so kind and generous. So I love to do that. I love to go to Powell Beach and swim. Many happy memories there. Summerland Sweets, that was my first out of the home job, working for 90 cents an hour for Ted Atkinson,
Yeah.
pouring syrup. I love to go there and have ice cream. And to, hike in the hills and walk around. I love the village of Summerland. It's changed a lot. Still love to go there. It's home to me.
Do you kind of like the more urbanized development, or do you kind of prefer when it was more rural?
I think what I miss is the main street, the coffee shops. And there are one or two, and there's the bakery, but there was more of a sense of community, I think, on Main Street than there seems to be now, with shops changing fairly frequently. I think it must be very hard to run a business in Summerland, and I take my hat off to the ones that have remained. Really miss the Summerland 5 and 10 store. The run by Jerry and Edith Hallquist. That was a favorite haunt of ours. You can get everything there. Now, in fairness, the hardware store that is there now is also very good. I miss that. Knowing people and Maisels, and I understand that things need to move on and people go to Penticton, I guess, or to the big box stores. I think that's a shame. I think that's hard on a smaller community to sustain a community in the face of people ordering online, people going to the big cities, people buying, at Costco. I think it's hard to keep a small community going in terms of businesses. It is such a privilege to grow up in a small town. At least that is how I found it, to grow up in a small town, to still have roots there, to still have people who know our family and remember our family, and to go back there and to revisit those places and those people. It's I think it's a privilege. And the museum. I'm just, so the two places. I think that the Summerland Museum and the Summerland Ornamental Gardens are amazing projects. Run a lot. I know a lot of by volunteers, and a lot of great efforts on the people of Summerland. We are so fortunate to have those. Those are two places that are dear to my heart. That you have the museum who is actively supporting the life of people in Summerland, both the history and the current things that are happening currently. It's very impressive what is being done in the museum, and also at the gardens. We have trees there for Mom and Dad, and it's a lovely place for me to visit and to remember all the incredible hours that we spent as a family there and enjoyed. And so to see the work of the local people, volunteers and staff supporting that, I think that's remarkable.